some short things just by total information awareness. And the Office of Total Information Awareness is really uses exactly what poor Mr. Gates, I don't mean to pick on him, but he did give us the terms in this book, Business at the Speed of Thought, in which he says, you know, the great promise of the newest technologies of information retrieval is what he called data mining, the ability to compile electronic information, track people down in terms of, you know, the electronic traces of information that they've laid. And then he said, really on almost a statistical basis, to create like data archives, dig down deep into the database and then hold it up in some kind of like encrypted way. And the Office of Total Information Awareness intends, in fact, to gather email, credit card transactions, cell phone records, to compile, in fact, like electronic autobiographies, really, of the population itself. And then it said what it's led by, in fact, is the promise of effective data mining. So I thought, well, I've heard that term before. And before, you know, you think of that in terms of business and marketing possibilities. But what happens when something like data mining is not simply marketing any longer, but becomes like a language of warfare? And who really is the war being used against? Pick up the New York Times, and it's an article called Citizen Watch in the Name of Security, Privacy for Me, Not Thee. And it begins like this. In the spring of 2001, Chief Justice William Rehnquist sounded alarm, and I quote, "Technology now permits millions of important and confidential conversations to occur through a vast system of electronic networks," he wrote in a First Amendment case. These advances, however, raise significant privacy concerns. We're placed in the uncomfortable position of not knowing who might have access to our personal and business emails, our medical and financial records, or our cordless and cellular telephone conversations, end quote. From Vietnam and Watergate until September 11th, legal protection of privacy rights was moving in only one direction, with judges and legislatures in the states across the ideological spectrum working hard to create what's in many ways a new legal right. Before 9/11, the American concern with invasion of privacy was growing, meaning in fact juridical protection for privacy was growing. September 11th changed everything. The Pentagon attracts considerable attention today for a proposed database of unprecedented scale to help in government anti-terrorism efforts. It would collect every sort of information imaginable, including student grades, internet activity, medical histories. The USA Patriot Act, passed in October 2001, also altered the balance between privacy and government power in public ways. And then the article goes on to say something really interesting. It said that public opposition to intrusions on privacy are really sharp and really focused as long as it's perceived to be business intrusions on privacy. So at least in the United States, people are really concerned and will defend the legal right to privacy of individual space as long as the person who's doing the offending are marketeers phoning you at nighttime, for example, on these kind of coded phones, or others who are perceived to be, in fact, invading your privacy. But the thing that's happened since September the 11th, the article goes on to say, is that when it's the government coming after your privacy in the name of the war on terrorism, suddenly citizen concerns subside completely. And everyone then says, well, this is sort of like a kind of unavoidable trade-off that we have to have. We all have to content ourselves with much less privacy in return for security of the nation as a whole, for collective security as a whole. So I thought, well, that's really an interesting situation to both begin this course on and then particularly to end the course on. Because we really end the course then on this, you know, like really diametrically opposed futures of technology. You hear, you know, participating like Steve Gibson's really wonderful performance on Virtual DJ, in which he's using the same technologies and talking about its wonderfully emancipatory and transformative possibilities, and how in Steve's terms, you know, the possibility, the vision of technology that he has is in fact that it enhances personal freedoms. It enhances and extends the human nervous system in kind of creative ways. And as many of you know, by actually participating in his performance, getting up and dancing, that's exactly the way it does. You know, like it really changes the nature of composition and certainly changes the nature of music itself. And change the nature of music, in fact, when your body is being played, but then in fact, rather than being simply a passive spectator of a sound matrix, in fact, you actually begin to author the sound matrix itself. And then sort of you turn your eye to the war on terrorism. And this actual things like, you know, the Office of Total Information Awareness, the networking of information at borders. The fact that in the United States, for example, the American Federal Appeals Court said this week that, in fact, the line that's been drawn between spying and criminal legislation has suddenly been erased. And the Justice Department says that's great. We have lots of anti-terrorist weapons that we're going to use. And I thought, well, in reality then, the life and death struggle for the question of media, technology, and politics is really the struggle between technology on the one hand as a form of creative enhancement, and on the other hand, the possibility of peril of technology that in fact becomes a real carceral. It becomes like an electronic kind of prison box within which everyone is sort of admitted itself. And at the end of the debate, it comes down to a theme that's been running through this course, that in fact the promise and peril of technology has a lot to do with our subjective choices in some ways as to what in fact forms of resistance are going to be. So the course, I would say, the discussions in the class have just been really fantastic. And for myself, the class ends as I think a good class should end, is that it doesn't end with a set of facts. It just really begins with like an opening in some ways. Because actually the content of media, technology, and politics is in fact simply unfolding as we speak. And I think, really through the next several months, the whole content of many of these articles in media in the Cybercultures Reader themselves are just going to be sort of really spliced and sort of reconfigured by the actual events that occur within cyberculture itself. And several years ago, one would have thought to talk about cybercultures and talk about like a utopian future sometime in the future. But as this course has gone on, it becomes pretty evident that both in the hands of, particularly in the hands of governments, in the hands of business, and in the hands of the new Concordia, which I'll be teaching next semester, and we'll see how this goes, that in fact cyberculture is no longer simply a utopian promise. It's like a real materiality that with which we have. And I think the one defense that we have in terms of trying to think through what would be the possibility of an ethics of technology is an act of really active contemplation. Like a really good thinker, Martin Heidegger, said that probably one of the more radical things that one can do and critical things that one can do in an area, in an age in which we are actually literally harvested by technology, is in fact to return to the act of thought itself, to active contemplation, which is mixed with action itself. And during this class, there's been lots of active contemplation, and a lot of good discussions have taken place in the course. And the presentations and the essays that I intend to write have really been fantastic, because they all have a common theme with many different subject matters. They have a common theme of the really active, contemplative, deeply contemplative minds on your part, and in the active contemplation and creation is then, stretch right across the whole technological field, and it forces technology really to reveal its possibilities for a transformation, but also at the same time, in many, many cases of your really critical writings, to also reveal its sort of perils for human domination itself. So some other people are going to make presentations tonight, and at the end of the presentations, Ted and I have marked all the papers or all the final exams. So go and get those. For anyone that's not here today, they can pick them up on Friday, or I leave them with the secretary later, but I can go get them a little bit later. But I want to, Ricardo, are you going to present? This is going to be a presentation on technology from the Colombian perspective. Would that be fair to say? Yeah. Or maybe not fair to say.